You're supposed to come back from meetings feeling energized.
I know. Yeah, I just feel overwhelmed with the stuff I mentioned when I was gone. I don't feel.
Yeah.
I mean, I think once I do finally get things controlled, I'll be more excited. I got some good feedback about the stuff I presented on, so that was super encouraging and motivating. But I went to another conference 2 weeks before that, so
Yeah. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
done with way too much travel. And I don't know, I feel like I feel like I mostly just go and see that other critical sort of people. I don't really usually collaborate with people who don't have that skill set.
Right.
So I'm missing the people that I'm trying to meet and network with. I just didn't feel that it was fun. It was good connecting with people I know and like useful. But at least I wasn't alone. I felt that way apparently. So I guess that's good. I don't know. You weren't like next year's been huge. Oh, really? Oh my God. Huge. Definitely. We have about 1,500 and they usually have about 3,000. So it's going to be crazy. I don't know how they're going to manage it. It's in Reno. Yeah. And then every year. Oh, really? It was fun.
Because you have to walk through.
I know. Right. Yeah.
And then they had
it's so depressing
their booths, like where they have little weddings, you know. And it's just like bizarre. It's like we don't.
We're not the audience.
Right.
Have they ever gone back to that?
Well, they did. And then we bought our house. And we got it back to university.
Right.
And then I stepped off.
Just now with this strike,
Now I don't have to be the program anymore. It's not fighting this battle.
Yeah. Where are they doing it this year? Or I guess next year.
Next year actually is a hotel model for the DC because it's the freshman anniversary.
Okay. Yeah. DC and a bunch of yeah, now we
right.
so that's so much easier. I mean, we still got alcohol on stage.
That's a pretty solid ball. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's also okay.
Where did you fall off?
I should go down and say
Whoa. Shoot sounds like a place, it's an appropriate place to fall. Yeah, you can just use it.
I've been meaning to tell you this middle of No, I don't know. I don't think it's
You have a youth event? Oh, yeah. We're not collecting any more of the litter now.
well, in fact, to the students, because they have to do a certain 8,000.
Okay, today we've got maybe something a little bit different than our standard seminar. One thing, we've got two speakers instead of one. Tommy's going to start it off with Tommy Kay, who is a Cherokee native. He is the Forest Resource Specialist for the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation. And he has been doing that for working for the tribe for the last 18 years in various natural resource management capacities. And then Michelle Baumfleck, who is an ethnobotanist and a research biologist with the Southern Research Station up in Asheville. She got her BS in environmental biology from SUNY, her master's in natural resources from University of Vermont, and a PhD in natural resources and American Indian studies from Cornell. Her work is focused on management of culturally significant plants and tries to incorporate traditional knowledge into that management. So, thank you guys for coming down here.
Okay, Chio, Ayan, Tommy Kay, Dagodoan, Shishko, Digyo-san. Some of you heard that earlier, so you might know what that means, but I said, hello, my name is Tommy Kay. I am from the Birdtown community, and I did not say Saligee, North Carolina on the end of that, which implies I'm from Cherokee, North Carolina. Saligee means that's how you say Cherokee in our language. And I'd like to say thank you for allowing this opportunity to tell our story, a little bit of our history, and where we're going in the future, and how we see forest management, natural resource management, and hopefully we're able to explain our relationship with those natural resources. So the title says a lot. Incorporated Cherokee traditional ecological knowledge into the sustainable management of culturally significant plants. That picture is actually at a research location in the Waynesville watershed. And the guy standing there is Tyson Sampson, another enrolled member of the Eastern Band Cherokee Indians. He has been a very important person capturing a lot of community insight for this work and for that traditional ecological knowledge component. He is standing in the middle of a ramp patch with Clifford.
Yes, my dog.
And we look forward to doing this work and have for the last 3 years, but it has been a kind of rocky road to get there. So I'd like to acknowledge all these entities on this slide, the Tribal Seal, Forest Service, Arboretum, my newly reconstructed office, which is the natural resources side of the now newly Agriculture and Natural Resource Department of the Eastern Band Cherokee Indians. And these folks here, there's too many Cherokee plant gatherers to list, obviously. Some of those gatherers also participated into our community interviews. And there you see Tyson, you see Dr. Jim Chamberlain, and the town of Waynesville, and Dr. McCoy, and Matt Wynn. First of all, let's talk about the Eastern Band Cherokee Indians background. And I'm going to skip back and forth between this slide, these three. So this right here was ultimately our homeland. We occupied 8 states. This is a traditional map that was used, that we often refer to. And some of these lands here that were I really screwed it up, didn't I?
Okay, this is like the test, if we can like give the seminar here, is if I can figure out how to hit play.
There it is.
Did you figure it out?
Yeah, I found the pointer, but anyway, I can continue on. This
Is that,
So
is
you trying to
that
get
it?
both sides?
There we go.
sorry about that little technical glitch, but what I want to say here is some of this land we also shared with the Creek Nation historically. And a question has came up in a recent partnership with SAMMAP, which stands for Southern Appalachian Man and Biosphere, whether or not to use this map. And the reason for that is because, like I said, we shared those portions with the Creek. And what is important about that is that, yeah, we fought over these lands, where we share with the Creek, and we fought over these lands because we had interest in it, but at the same time, it wasn't a war. It was usually over a game of stickball. And I'll get to that later on in the talk, the first half. But we didn't want to insult the Creek, but at the same time, we decided to continue using this map because it could hopefully help them, assist them in creating some type of relationship that we have with the Forest Service and our neighbors on conservation. So we are still talking and discussing land boundaries. We probably will always talk and discuss land boundaries. But, so we went from an 8-state nation down to 56,000 acres in Western North Carolina. Obviously, you guys have heard the story of the Trail of Tears. There were 7 routes out to Oklahoma that we were removed from our Aboriginal homeland. And fortunately, we still exist, and we are still present, and we are still willing to share our traditional ecological knowledge for the sake of conservation and sustainability. So, to give you a geographical interlude and explanation of who we are as the Eastern Band, that's the best I can do for the time on. So, traditional ecological knowledge is a relationship with the plants and the natural resource. Food is medicine. from Aboriginal communities. It's not just to feed hunger, it's to feed community, it's to feed, a teaching session. It's more than just consumption. And by doing that, by taking some of those reasons in what food is medicine also implies the traditional ecological knowledge of harvesting and taking from the landscape. There's also a method in doing that too. So what we're doing here is we are taking traditional ecological knowledge and sharing that in certain proponents to advocate conservation and sustainability on what you will see, ramps and Sochan, which is a green-headed coneflower, and why that's important and how that traditional ecological knowledge actually kind of is new science. And we did that by forming partnerships with the Forest Service and with North Carolina Arboretum and with various universities throughout the region. And it took some trust. We have a long history with dealing with the federal government, and of course we learned not to trust them. And but for the sake of our natural resources, it seems that my community is more than willing to start sharing, because it's just not about our interest, it's about the livelihood of the natural resource and the natural landscape. And it also reminds us to be conscious of our 7-generation rule, which you don't disturb or destroy or negatively impact a natural resource for 7 generations after you die. So we have been successful in capturing some of our community concerns about these resources. And those concerns are the depletion in some of our culturally significant plants, and ramps are one of those. So a little bit of background about me. I come from the Long Hair clan. We have 7 clans. That's all right now, I guess. I served in the United States military, the United States Navy. It was an interesting time. And I carried an associate's in forestry from Beloit College. I was fortunate enough, or cursed, to start working right on the heels of graduation, and I've been, exposed to what it's like to work for my tribe in all these disciplines, and I did learn how to do that with the AAS from Haywood Community College. I can tell you, they never taught me how to write a grant. They never taught me how to prepare a budget and how I was going to do all of that in a year. So I had some learning curves to get around, and I did. And started out as an air quality technician. Went on into a watershed coordinator, an environmental planner, and now what I am today, which is a forest resource specialist. And some of you might ask why forest resource specialist, and it's just because I shared with the meeting earlier with some of you guys that we look at a forest through a different lens. We don't just see a commercial forest, we see a thriving world that takes a conscientious effort to get a relationship with that forest ecosystem and try to see what it's telling us and work with it. So that is something that we discussed internally when this position was being created. Yeah, I did help write the position, but I had to go through the rehiring process too, and so that's why it's called Forest Resource Specialist and not just a forest. So that little red dot right there is this magnified. And our landscape is roughly 57,000 acres. Possessory holding is a word on there that you guys might wonder what that is. And the reason for that is because on my trust lands is what this is called. It's called trust lands because it's held in trust by the federal government. We are only possessory holdings of certain acreage. For instance, I own an acre. I actually own more of that, my family does, but I have 1 acre. It's definitely my name only. And I'm the possessory holder of that 1 acre. And once I pass it down to my kids, because I can't sell that to a non-enrolled member. I can sell it to another enrolled member, but I wouldn't do that. But I am only the holder of that property until my bloodline dies out. And when that happens, it goes back to the tribe. Then it goes back to the trust capacity of that land or our boundary. So, and all tribes aren't like this. Some tribes have allotments. The only other tribe that is close to us in this land entitlement is the Nez Perce tribe out in Idaho. We are very similar, us and the Nez Perce tribe. Total forested acres is roughly 50,000. Non-forested, roughly 8,000. And our tribal reserve is another interesting piece to this because it is basically right here in the northern area of our trust lands, our boundary. And it's 5,500 acres, but what's unique about it is we share that border with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, another Department of Interior agency that is the governing agency that we are assigned to as the Department of Interior. The federal agency within that quad boundary is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA. In Indian country, we like to call it bossing Indians around because that's what they do, they try to boss us around. And we have other tax-based land in this region, and it's about 1,200 acres, and we do not want that to go into trust, not all of it, because some of it we can practice forestry a little bit quicker because we don't have to get the green light from the BIA. So you'll learn that I'm not a fan of the BIA as we talk. So all tribes don't have that relationship. Some tribes have great relationships with the BIA. Just currently we don't have a good one. So moving on to what we're here to talk about, just to give you guys a picture about what traditional ecological knowledge means and what it actually represents. It represents a 3-generation basket making family. And you have here white oak baskets. And you have bloodroot that was used to dye these baskets. And you have, do I see some honeysuckle and white oak right there? I think I do. So I think that's river cane. So you see a variety of natural resources here that are important to us. It's important to these 3 ladies out here. You have daughter, mother, and grandmother, and they're all 3 basket makers. And our baskets are a symbol of who we are as Cherokee. To give you guys an example, a white oak that is about 6 to 12, 4 to 12 inches in diameter, and anywhere from at minimal at least 10 feet tall. These guys can make 2 medium-sized baskets out of that bring about $450 a pop. So that's a lot more valuable than if those stems were to go to the mill to be cut up for pulp. So we are exploring TEK on a timber use policy too, so our timber use. So this right here is shifted from non-timber products into timber in that arena. So we're seeing what we can do to generate those stems for baskets because we've tried to do mimic that natural characteristic, and the stems aren't what the basket makers need. So, and as you look out at the landscape, we look at the landscape, we see and feel a connection. It's not just it is a great vista in some of these places, and even underneath the forest canopy, but that's part of the connection and relationship that we're hoping to share through this work, sharing the traditional ecological knowledge for the sake of resources. We are about 16,000 members strong in membership. It's not real big compared to Western tribes, and but we stayed here. That's something that we have a lot of pride about, is that we never left our homeland. My ancestors, people have asked me, a lot of people in Cherokee go to Oklahoma a lot because they have ancestors that walk the Trail of Tears. My ancestors all stayed So to me, the Trail of Tears is a part of my extended history, but in terms of my family, we stay, we fought to stay on the mountains. So we have that exchange between us and the Western tribe, but we are different. We're not in unison. We are different tribes. Strong food and craft traditions. There you go. There's a stickball. Some of you may have been to Cherokee and seen a stickball game. And if you ever get asked to play stickball, gentlemen, you better man up because it's pretty damn tough. It's it's a version of lacrosse, but you don't have pads, and you can get hit by a stick, and you will get hit by a stick, and you can't fight. But if you do fight, you'll get switched. So it's a very rigorous sport. It was an alternative for war. Us in the Creek, historically, over land, we would have a long game of stickball. Sometimes stickball would go on for months, and the field would be as long as 6 miles, and people died in stickball. So it was a very intense. Of course, we toned it down since then, but we still practice. I really want to play this year, and at 45 years old, you really think about if you should be playing because you got responsibilities. But it is definitely they have a Legends version, so I might qualify for Legends. But our chief played this year. It was the first time our chief has played, and so he was just redeemed up and moving slow the next day with a big black eye. So I think that it's something that we're revitalizing some of our traditions. I think it's great. So on now to try to give you guys a clear image about what food is. Here we have Miss Cherokee serving our elders on Ramps and Rainbow Day. Yeah, we're guilty of having a Ramp Festival too. And this is the first spring festival. This is when people can share a meal and share how their winters went and share whatever's going on in the local political world and what are we doing to help make sure that ramps are healthy. And so it's an opportunity for us to bring together our community, and then after we've maybe had a stiff winter in the mountains. This is my middle son. I just took him. That's like the biggest fish I've ever caught at that age, but he was really happy to catch that fish in some of our local watersheds, and it was a place that we reserved for enrolled members only to fish. And of course, we had to go right home right after he caught that and eat it, and we did. And it was good. It provided me an opportunity to talk to him about my stories growing up fishing the same place I took him and what we used and how we used to catch fish. So it was a good day. This is a cake of chestnut bread, and it has got a hickory leaf wrapped around it. And that is a very, very good piece of traditional food, in my opinion. I love chestnut bread. We have to use the non-native chestnut, but it still tastes the same. But again, this right here is a fall delicacy. I just had some chestnut bread and just today put in an order to get more. But we still have people that make these foods by hand and harvest everything from the wild, and it is a way for us to talk about stories about what the chestnuts look like this year and what did the hickory leaves look like, what are you seeing? So we can hopefully capture some of those concerns in some type of scientific research and kind of bring that into life a little bit better. And this is me bringing a elk out of Cataloochee. No, I'm just kidding. But I was out west. I've been fortunate enough to go out west and harvest animals, and I try to bring everything I can back with me to share with my family. So maybe we'll have an elk season in Cherokee one day, and I won't have to go across the Mississippi to do that. Here you go, traditional ecological knowledge. I'm not going to read that to you guys. You guys can read it. But this is a term. These are some terms that have been kicked around for some time. And in the 18 years I've been with my tribe working, when I first started, it was a very small office. And now we have like over 30 employees. I think there was 4 when I started. So we're growing and we're reaching out to folks and creating these relationships that will hopefully lead us to expanding our traditional footprint in these landscapes so we may influence management. Because some of that knowledge is something that has not been known to the Forest Service scientists or the Park Service scientists. And now we're engaged in sharing that research, or sharing that knowledge to incorporate research. So it's hands-on. It's, it's the accumulation of knowledge through generations, and it's context specific. And it's hopefully a good way for us to express that relationship. And it's a relationship that has been valued, and it is a relationship that has influenced, publications that the Forest Service has put out. And that's the story from the native side. So I will now turn it over and segue into what the story is like from the Forest Service side. So thank you. Michelle.
Thanks. I have two questions. First, this goes until 5 o'clock. Is that great? Do you normally stop at like 4:45 and leave a little time for questions? Or okay, just checking. Second, so we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge. How many of you are familiar with this term? Yes. Excellent. Okay, that's fantastic. So this isn't new. So I'm glad this resonates with you. And just wanted to thank you for having us here today. It's a real pleasure. We spent time with graduate students and with faculty, and it's already been a really enriching day. So we're here, as Tommy's already been sharing with his experiences, not to share results so much as to share a process of how the Forest Service and the Eastern Band of Cherokees have been partnering together to do work that's meaningful on both ends. And we'll get a couple of examples of some of the projects that we're working on today, but it really is grounded in that idea of valuing traditional ecological knowledge, evaluating that community knowledge that Tanya was talking about that comes along with going out every year and seeing how the hickories are doing. Did they drop earlier this year? Is that a trend? Like these are the kinds of knowledge that folks who spend a lot of time intimately with forested landscapes here in the Southern Appalachians and have been doing it for generations are really keyed into in ways that oftentimes scientists who have maybe spent a little bit less time in these landscapes might have a different set of knowledge about. So just to give a little bit of background on this, this is something that the Forest Service has been working pretty hard to move towards for a number of years now, and this is kind of culminating in, for example, documents like this that are coming out of our research side, like a tribal engagement roadmap. So the Forest Service on the research side is mandated in some ways to work with tribes in really respectful sorts of ways. There's been very long legacies of different kinds of research that are really extractive with communities, where people come in, might find out some knowledge that could be useful in scientific studies, but aren't necessarily contributing back to community needs. And that's not what we want to do. It's like the complete opposite. We're partnering directly with the tribe and have been in the get-go to create research that answers questions that's really important for Indian Cherokees, for example. And that's basically what this roadmap is kind of setting out for scientists across the United States. So, advanced traditional knowledge and perspectives, and advanced research, for example, on topics of joint interest. And I know that there are other people here in this room who are also doing similar kinds of work. One of the ways, there are a lot of different ways that the Forest Service has been moving to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge. A lot of places out west, it's been around different kinds of fire management, and fire regimes. That's starting to happen here too. We just had some discussions about that today. And I know that Helen is also very interested in working on this and has been with plants like river cane. So these are things that are already happening. But one area of great interest for tribes and the Forest Service is really focusing on culturally significant plants. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that, but one of them is, so culturally significant plants, just to give a little bit of Forest Service language for some of you who might know, sometimes they're called non-timber forest products, and that's just, where that can encompass plants and fungi that are used for food, for medicine, for crafts, for spiritual purposes, for a lot of different things, but for different reasons, are really culturally important. And historically, within forest management and also within different kinds of research programs, these are not the plants that are the focus of attention. They just have not really gotten as much attention as they might deserve. So oftentimes, communities that are harvesting them and value them have developed relationships with these plants, really are keyed into how they're doing locally. And so they have a lot of wonderful knowledge and concern, and but they also have questions that need answering that just haven't really necessarily been addressed yet. And these plants are not typically the focus of forest management. So that's why we're moving in this direction. And we'll give some examples. We have this culturally significant plants initiative with Southern Research Station and the tribe, and we'll talk about a few of the plants that we've been working on. But just to give a little bit of background on how this forms, and some of this happened, I've only been working on this project for a few years, and a lot of these relationships were in place when I got here, so Tommy can talk more about that. But it really involved fostering really long-standing trusting relationships between the Forest Service and folks like Tommy at the Eastern Band of Cherokees. And that was like sitting down together and saying, hey, we're really curious about how ramps are doing. Or we're really interested in like these kinds of plants. We have a need here. So as that issue identification was formalized in the Memorandum of Understanding, laying out the kinds of work we wanted to do together, and to engage respectfully with tribes, there's a couple of additional steps that we have to do. One of them is going before tribal council and together and laying it out and saying, this is the kind of work we'd like to do. It involves talking to community members. These are the kind of information we might be asking. And there's a discussion there, if that's okay, and to get permission to be able to do that. And if any of you have done different kinds of social science research before, you might have had to go through an IRB process. We had to do that as well through the university, but we also had to do it through the tribe because they have their own IRB process. And Tommy mentioned Tyson Sampson, the gentleman at the beginning of our talk in the first slide, but something that was incredibly important to this process was hiring a community researcher to do field work with us and to go out and do interviews with us. And we were so lucky to have Tyson, he says he's not a fluent Cherokee speaker, but he's pretty darn close, you know, and he happens to be an amazing plant person as well, and happens to know everybody in Cherokee. So we couldn't have had somebody better to do this work with who has such a passion for seeing knowledge about plants move forward. So I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about this, but it's because it's so integral to laying the groundwork to having these relationships to keep moving work like this forward. So to get into the specific plants we're talking about, we've been talking about ramps a lot. Okay, so ramps? Who's eaten ramps? Okay, who's heard of ramps?
Same ones that ate them.
Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with ramps, they're sometimes called wild leeks if you're from up north. They are a wild onion. They're delicious. They stink to high heaven, but some, depends who you talk to. They make you stink.
Chicago.
It depends who you talk to. Yeah, Chicago, the town of Chicago is named after ramps. Yeah. Referring to the smell of ramps, like a skunk, place of skunks.
Stinky town.
Stinky town.
Chicago.
So in any case, and ramps are actually pretty widespread across the eastern United States. They're a beautiful plant in the lily family. Here's the bulb, so you'll see it goes kind of like scallion. The entire plant is edible. And what else do I say about it? It's slow growing. That's an important thing to know in regards to our research. And down here, we're at the very southern end of its range. So it's in limited habitat here. It likes music coves where it's cool, rich soil, that sort of thing. And it's really important traditional food of Cherokees. And it also happens to be what I'm going to call a cultural keystone species or a cultural keystone food of Appalachia. This is a food that's extremely important to Cherokees, and over time, Cherokee folks have shared the knowledge of this plant with people who are arriving here, who, as we were just having a conversation with Joan about this earlier today, brought their own knowledge of a very similar plant from Europe over with them called bear garlic. So this is a plant that a lot of different folks in Appalachia have adopted, and it's really well aligned with places like West Virginia. There are ramp festivals in the springtime all across North Carolina and Tennessee and West Virginia, including that Ramps and Rainbows Festival that Connie was talking about. Ramp eating contests are very popular at these things. And so, like, this is a plant that people have really strong feelings about. That they either really love it, or really hate it, but it's a plant that brings people together in a lot of different ways. Recently, in the past like 20 or so years, maybe a little more than that, there have also been some strong concerns about over-harvesting of this plant because it's become much more popular outside of the Appalachian region, where it's had these really strong food traditions. And in the springtime, you can go into a restaurant in San Francisco, you can go into a restaurant in New York City, in Denver, Colorado, and there will be ramps on the menu. Not because those ramps grow in San Francisco or Colorado, but because people are harvesting them and sending them over to these places. And even within other parts of the Eastern Range where they might not have been as popular further north, they're getting more and more popular. So there's a lot of concerns about over-harvesting and increased commercial use of this plant. And what's happened locally here is back in the 90s that the Smoky Mountain Park, which is right next door, which is Cherokee, that's the fall boundary that Tony was talking about, and it's bounded by what used to be Cherokee traditional lands, which is now Smoky Mountain National Park. There had been kind of like a gentleman's agreement of ramp harvesting in there for the longest time, but studies done in the park showed that this is a very slow-growing plant and basically prescribed that you can only harvest a very limited amount of the plant, like 10% of a population every 10 years or something, for it to be sustainable, which effectively shut down ramp gathering in the park. And that study was sound, except it didn't incorporate Cherokee traditional knowledge. It's no fault of the author of the study, but it is based on methods that other folks use, not what Cherokee folks use.
Or what was assumed.
Or was
Yep.
assumed. So this is an issue, especially for these non-timber forest products. It's a bigger issue where people might be kind of regulated upon for doing things that for actions that aren't actually capturing what people are actually doing. So we're trying to create some science here that fully incorporates Cherokee practices. Now, more recently, I'm just going to glaze over this part, but in that very same park, in parks all across, national parks all across the United States, there's now a regulation change that allows federally recognized tribes to gather in parks, except that you have to go through an environmental assessment for every single plant that you might be interested in gathering to demonstrate that it's sustainable, that it's not going to impact park resources. So this is something that the research that we're working on with the tribe is going to down the line be contributing to environmental assessments. The Eastern Band of Cherokees was actually the very first tribe in the whole United States to submit a request to gather plants from the national park, and they did that 2 years ago. So they've already moved forward with one plant, and we're working on ramps to potentially be down the line on there too. So for the past couple of years, we designed a set of experiments to understand Cherokee knowledge in terms of ramp harvesting. So we're doing this in two ways. We've got, actually more than two ways, but I'm going to talk about two right now. One is a set of harvest experiments, and the other is really going into the community and doing interviews and participant observation to understand the values and the practices behind ramp gathering, and just like the social importance behind ramp gathering. So for our harvest experiments, we're just asking a basic question of how different harvest strategies and intensities affect populations of ramps. And what we're doing is we're looking at 3 different kinds of harvesting strategies. So we're looking at a bulb harvest, and this bulb harvest is like the way that other folks down here in Appalachia tend to harvest plants. This is typically gone out with shovels, digging up whole clumps of plants. You're taking the root, the rhizome, everything. And then we have 2 other methods that are cut, and this is the Cherokee traditional method, which is to cut the plant and leave some in the ground. And we're doing that at an early stage. That's called a tip harvest, because some people do prefer to go out very early in the season to get those ramps. Very first thing, it's the first green thing out of the ground, very early in the spring. It's a medicine. And then a later season harvest when the plant has fully leafed out, to understand how these different kinds of harvesting treatments affect the plants. And we're doing that at 100% harvest just to see like what happens if we take everything. There are these over-harvesting concerns. And then an intermediate harvest level, which was guided by Cherokee harvesters. When we asked Tommy and we had one other gentleman to harvest as they would. And that rate came out to be about 40%. And just in case you're curious about, we're collecting several other kinds of metrics to understand the health of the population in terms of the size classes of the plants, which correlate to age structure and the way that the plants are capable of vegetative reproduction. We have, we collect our environmental factors, the total leaf width, monitoring the flowering and the seed production of the populations as well. I'm not going to have time to talk about most of those results today. And then so for the interviews, we spent time with 40 Cherokee community members, about 26 women, 14 men, a variety of ages, so different generations. And we talked about how they harvested ramps, what time of year they were going out to do these kinds of things. How did they know it was time to go harvest ramps? Where are those environmental cues that are letting them know it's time to go up on the mountain? How they learned. Who taught you how to gather ramps? Have you seen any changes in the size of the population and the health of these plants? That sort of thing. And then some more kind of cultural information, like how do you like to prepare them? Who do you share these plants with? Just to kind of get a really rounded picture of the importance of ramps within this community. So a little bit of information. We're in mid-process, so I don't want to talk too much about our harvest experiments. We're going to be collecting 5 years of data, and we're only on year 2. So I don't want to share too much about this, but we have some baseline densities to understand. In our populations, they actually had a pretty high density, about 98 ramps per meter squared. We have nice baseline information on some of the size class structure. That 4 millimeters, like about 30% of the plants were above 4 millimeters stem diameter, and that correlates to basically when they might start some vegetative reproduction. So it has to do with the viability of the population. We found out that gatherers have a really strong preference for larger stems. So this is going to be something that ties into the sustainability of this gathering practice. By taking larger ones, leaving smaller ones for the next year to grow, you might relate to that with fishing strategies too, right? There's like a different size classes and age classes you're interested in taking. This is probably going to be really difficult for you to see, but so the blue line are our control plots. Well, this is 2016, 2017, 2018, and okay, I'll just read this to you because I can see that you might have a hard time seeing it. The green is that late season leaf harvest where the bulb was left in the ground. So you can kind of see that leaf harvest is, like, everything is, leaf harvest is doing pretty well. The intermediate bulb harvest and that early season tip harvest statistically are about the same in terms of the plot densities that we're seeing, and we're getting similar results with that 100% harvest. You can see that like these methods are having some much lower regeneration rates, and the decline between 2017 and 2018 that we're seeing across all plots That might have to do with several different factors. One of them is that every year, there's like, not every year, but in 2017 there was a flush of seedlings of this plant, and most of them died in 2018. That's a common thing that happens with ramps. They produce a fair number of seeds, but the seeds aren't, the seedlings aren't retained past a couple of years. But basically what this is showing so far is that is the leaf harvest. This one, if it's done at that intermediate rate, the plot densities are almost the same as the control harvest. So, you cut those plants later on in the season when they've had time to photosynthesize, for their bulb to get bigger. You're not going to really affect their retention for the next year. So this is a very nice message to be sharing with folks, is this leaf harvest is something that we should really be thinking about focusing on. Now, the tip harvest is maybe not looking as hot, but I just wanted to point out something else. We've been monitoring the emergence of these plants, and that changes from year to year. The green is 2017, the blue is 2018. We started going out at the end of February. It takes fully 6 weeks for all the plants in one of these plots to emerge. And from our interviews, we found out that a fair number of people do prefer to go out earlier in the season. So if they're going out earlier, they might be going out when there's only 60% of the plants are up. So there might be some inherent sustainability built into an earlier season harvest, just in the fact that not all the plants are there yet. So it's something we're thinking about. So we'll have to see how that goes. Within the interviews, there was a lot of consistency about the way that people were taught about plants and a very strong conservation ethic. So I'd love to just play for you. Maybe you don't have time for both of these clips, but one of them. Okay, no, I might have to escape for this. But I wanted to just share, instead of me telling you, I wanted you to hear from a gatherer the importance of cutting the plants that's really instilled in people from generation to generation. This came across very strongly. So.
It's important that you cut them in order to leave the root or the bulb in order for them to reproduce again next year.
Yep.
Because I think that our people have always felt like this is what Mother Earth gave us. We're taking care of it, and we want to secure it for generations to come.
So that sentiment was echoed again and again across all of the people that we spoke with, and I'll just share one more quick clip with you, if I can get it to, and hand-eye coordination.
Anything we take out of the ground, we give her tobacco
Give your
offering.
thanks.
And that's what she's saying. And that's one thing I'm proud of my granddaughters. I have 3. And I'm very proud of them because they already know this. And I have a 7-year-old great-grandson. He also knows what to do.
So just again to underscore the pride that people have in teaching their family and teaching like younger generations about how to respectfully interact with plants. And I think this is part of like the bigger picture. Besides just focusing like say on those plots or like a specific cutting method, it's really thinking about how this particular community is interacting with the forest, interacting with these particular plants. And I'd like to really communicate that part of sustainability to this. So, what do we first? Just go down a little bit. Oh.
Man, this thing's weird.
We only have over.
That one? Is
Next
that
one
it?
over.
Right or left?
Right. Okay. So, phenological relationships is something else that's really coming out strongly from our interviews, which is interesting just in terms of how we might be thinking about climate change with these plants that are pretty sensitive. So there's a lot of relating, like ramps are associated with spraying all over the place. But then there's just like these like kind of cultural or like biological, botanical clues. Like when the snowball bush is blooming in my yard, I know it's time to go on the mountain and look for ramps because these aren't places that are that easy to get to. So the question is, how is that relationship with the snowball bush going to change, for instance? There's a lot of variability. So, but people hold this knowledge pretty dear. So these are the kinds of things that are coming out from our interviews as well. And I'll just mention quickly, that's one of the projects that we're working on. There's a number of other plants that we're also starting to focus on. One of them is Sochan, which is another edible plant used in the spring for its leaves. This is actually the first plant that's going to be gathered in Smoky Mountain National Park. We've been helping with some habitat model ground truthing to find really good locations for this plant. White oak is another one that Tommy mentioned before. It's prized by Cherokee basket makers. This is Butch Gloins. He's demonstrating how basket makers notch a tree so they can see the growth rings to know whether or not that's going to be good for basket making, if the rings are tight enough. And finding a tree like that is becoming harder and harder to do. So there's some questions about how the Forest Service might be able to contribute to management on Forest Service land to provide more opportunities for these white oak baskets. And also to combine with, I have a colleague who's going to be combining some FIA data to understand some other potentially good locations for white oak and white oak management. And we've got some other good things on the line coming down about River King. But in any case, that's what we wanted to share with you right now is just the kinds of work that we're embarking on. And is there anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear that this harvest rule, just so you know, and since we're being recorded, that we're undergoing a process too, okay? We don't want you to think that, wow, we're just going to open the floodgates and everybody in Cherokee is going to flock off to the Smoky Mountains National Park and collect these consumable botanicals. What we're doing, we're in the EA process right now. The EA is complete by the park. We're reviewing it from a department standpoint representing the tribe. But what we're setting up is we're setting up a limited lottery system. We're allowing only 35 permits. You have to have that permit on you and your enrollment card showing evidence that you are a member of a federally recognized tribe, Eastern Band Cherokee Indians, and that permit that you have went to a harvesting class, and we are providing a harvesting seminar for people who are interested in going to the park to harvest. So that is something that the tribe stepped up and said, if you're going to do this, we would like to go ahead and start this permitting process. The park is like, well, I think that once we already know that the science is already laid out that our method actually does stimulate the plant in a positive way, that maybe the permitting process won't be that necessary. And what the park's going to do is I've identified places where they're going to harvest a pretty good guesstimation about where folks are going to harvest, and we are going to the park's going to set up plots where they're going to harvest so the park can come back and assess and kind of have some backside data to kind of support that. Another thing that is important that is that the tribe gave the Smoky Mountains National Park $65,000 to do this work. So we are paying for that privilege that we once had. So that I thought was awesome of our tribal leadership to step to the plate and say we are actually going to fund this too, and it's not on our landscape. So I thought that right there kind of did two things. We as a tribe said we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and it also kind of insulates us from other nonprofit organizations like the Sierra Club and like the Nature Conservancy, because a lot of times our relationship with those agencies, it can be warm and fuzzy at first, but then it can kind of get ugly because we sometimes feel like they piggyback on us as the Native people to get their needs heard, but then when we turn to focus on a direct Native initiative, they may have an issue with it and they're very, very vocal about saying something. So I thought that by us doing that, handling that the way we did, it helped kind of insulate us as well. And it said, hey man, the tribe's in a position now that we can actually be players at this table, and we also can start sharing this if you guys just trust us to let it happen. So, but just wanted to be clear about that. So. But thank you.
And with that, thanks everybody.
Time for questions?
Thoughts? Suggestions?
So, my name is Carl and I'm from the Philippines. I've been working also with the tribes there, some of the tribes there, of course. And it seems like the system of the tribes here and there are almost the same, and even the challenges. And now my question is: are there a system to document these indigenous knowledge? Because there we have what we call the IKSP, Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices and Customary Laws, and then we formally document that in a like a record book or something. So with the different tribes.
Yeah, we are documenting. We've been asked by the United Nations through UNESCO to go abroad or have other countries come to the tribe and share this relationship we have with our government, so that it may encourage those relationships to be had in other countries with their native and Aboriginal groups. And we are on board with that. But we want to also make sure that some of the stuff that we are sharing and the mechanisms that we're and the path that we're going down remains true too. So we kind of got a little bit of homework to kind of reestablish that trust relationship with the federal government, to make sure because I don't want to be the native representative abroad and then them to have better success than we have because ours blew up down the road. So we want to make sure that we can try to make sure that that's pretty solid before that. But yes, we have been asked to do that, and that's something that we're definitely going to entertain. So that would help us share that template, so, if that's what you're asking.
Well, but like I think here, and I'm unfamiliar with the Philippine context, but I mean every single tribe here has their own kind of ideas and about what they're willing to share, and it's really up to them. It's their tribal sovereignty. So I think that some tribes within the United States very much bristle at the idea of having certain kinds of knowledge cataloged, and so that's something else that even within this research context, we are co-owners, or actually even in some situations, the tribe is fully ownership of a lot of this data, and it's up to them how they're going to share it. So
we'll discuss that internally with our tribal government, tribal council before we make that decision.
thanks.
I really enjoyed hearing about this partnership. I'm all for it, and I know it's probably really difficult at times. And other than obstacles that you've had to encounter outside, which are plenty outside of your own tribe, how has the partnership, the view of this partnership changed over time? How was it for you in the beginning as kind of like leading this effort to, work with the federal government, and how has that been received, and how is it received now?
Great question. And when I first had this agency relationship, it was with the EPA, my first encounter, in the job capacity of what I had previously. And to see and to hear about how the Forest Service has always been present with the BIA, and I've seen that when I worked for the BIA as a wildland firefighter, it basically, looking back at the time, I had this assumption that we're basically needed on an as needed basis, but it has gotten more intimate because forest management through native eyes has become more practical in some cases for sustainability. And I had seen and heard about these relationships basically in the western region of the United States with tribes, and to see it kind of go from an infancy distant stage to kind of getting more intimate with, we want to really know your traditional knowledge, because it was almost to me like this is our opportunity now to start trying to trust again, start sharing that. And when we deployed our research when we deployed Tyson, I have a hard time calling Tyson a research person because he's a friend too. But when we deployed Tyson in the community, because I knew he was going to do a great job, we had a treasure trove of interest, and Michelle actually went out with him, and I didn't want to go out with him because of time, but at the same time, having Tyson there, he was our voice, he was our departmental voice, and he knows these people better than I do. I'm the one that they see on tribal council giving the update and report, and to know that my community is accepting Michelle when they pull up in a Forest Service vehicle, a government vehicle, instead of shutting the door, made me feel like this is awesome. I hope that that bridge gets constructed more soundly now than it has historically. And one of the things that we are also entertaining is we have the BIA also present. That relationship has dwindled down to on a personal level now, and the Forest Service seems to be eager to step in and to relieve some of that concern about where do we get this technical capacity, where's our voice. But the Forest Service seems to be there willing. The director from the research station told my chief, I witnessed the conversation and said, we basically want you to know that if you need a research team, a very knowledgeable research team to do any kind of work for you on any of our landscapes, you've got it. And that was awesome because we'll capture that in an MOU and I'll sign it, and hopefully it'll start progressing and start planning for that 7-generation rule. So that's how I feel it's been perceived, and I think that's how I feel pretty confident that that's how it's being perceived in our community, because it is our community, really, that makes that's where the difference is.
You may have touched on this briefly earlier, but how do all the Cherokee feel about elk reintroduction into the park?
Oh, great question. We have a mixed bag of tricks with that one.
I would assume it'd be beneficial, but that's probably not the case.
It's not if you're a gardener.
Yeah.
We've had. I feel sorry for our wildlife guys because they're getting fed up, and it is a political season. Tribally now, our councilmen and chiefs are up for re-election next year, and of course you have big families with big gardens, and they're pounding the doors of the council members, putting pressure on them. And the last Natural Resource Committee meeting we had, one of the council members said it. He brought up hunting season. Said, how can we do that? And so, as a team, because our office really is truly a team, we are assisting in demonstrating how we don't have the habitat to offer up a hunting season unless you want to call hunting standing on somebody's front porch shooting an animal. I mean, it's so we are engaged in GIS layers to create a wildlife conductivity layer within our tribal landscape, so that we can identify where these elk are going and why they're going there. And if we've got 56,000 acres that we could do habitat, install some habitat in to kind of keep them out of the city lights. Hopefully we might stimulate a little interest on the park side too, because park really didn't have that kind of habitat when they brought them in. So, as I mentioned earlier to some of you guys, I think we're at the cusp of seeing, hopefully, that conservation is needed, even in a preservation landscape like the national park. And since they had the fire, since they got the elk, and since we're opening this harvesting rule, hopefully we can start building a foundation, if anywhere else around the perimeter of the park, to keep these animals, give them a safer sanctuary. So that's kind of how they were perceived. They were hated, they were loved, but it stimulated us to kind of say, okay, let's do this. Let's try to bring our heads together and work so we can, come to an easy agreement, a more gentler approach.
Great. If you guys can join us, I guess we can continue this conversation down at Nick's.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, but what
After
is
it,
it?
And at the time, to go to the last meeting, I might be doing I'll make you like brownie. Yeah, actually, I got your
you have my,
business card, right?